Americans who have lived abroad, biggest reverse culture shock upon returning to the U.S. Story 1. Flying from Shanghai back to Dallas was the biggest culture shock for me. Shanghai makes Dallas look like a ghost town, and the maglev train that runs over the city gives you a sense of scale like no other. Imagine being in a jet flying over a city that just seems to never end. Story 2. Having to drive everywhere. Dublin isn't the most bike-friendly place, but living there for several years and being able to hop on my bike and get across town in 20 minutes is something I will always miss. After being back in Illinois for 2 years, I still hate that I have to drive 2 miles to Target, BC. That's the only option for getting there and home in one piece. Story 3. Coming back to the U.S. after living in Japan for 7 years. Everyone seems so angry and selfish all the time. Public places like parks, streets, restrooms are just a disgusting mess that no one takes care of. Also, groceries were super cheap and fresh. I could get a week's worth of groceries for a family of 3 for around 10,000 yen. That's not possible in the U.S. Story 4. In the U.S., if I suggest we walk the 5 blocks to our destination on a beautiful sunny day, I'm met with incredulity, outrage, and a glare appropriate for puppy torturers. Walking as transport is apparently a sign of homelessness and failure at life. Story 5. The food. Lived in Canada from 2006 to 2014. You don't really notice it going the other way, but coming back holy. Everything is loaded with salt and sugar. Everything. It is jarring. I gained over 20 pounds my first year back. I get that people do not want to hear this because we all love our dino nuggets and cheap frozen pizza. But damn, they really are trying to kill us with our food. At the very least, they truly do not care if they kill us, so long as the profit margins are high. Related to that, the sheer number of truly obese people. Kids in particular. I lived in Toronto and it was incredibly rare to see a person who clearly weighed over 300 pounds, like maybe once a year. Coming back, it was just shocking how big the average American had become. I pretty much lay that at the feet of the food thing. Story 6. Coming back from Germany, Europe, and the customer service at U.S. restaurants was so intrusive and annoying. You cannot just sit and enjoy a meal with someone. You are constantly interrupted while talking, and while mid-chew. How is everything? Doing all right? Can I get you another drink? Etc. I get that some people like this type of service because they're used to or expect it, but it annoyed me to no end how the server constantly interrupted my meal. Story 7. Coming back to the U.S. from Cairo, it was not needing to be so alert all the time. There's a lot to like about Cairo, but it is a tourist city, and a lot of the businesses and locals take advantage of the tourists. It's a little thing, but you have to be ready to argue vehemently about every price and service. I didn't realize how much that was stressing me until I came home. Story 8. Tipping culture. I spent several months in Latin America once and in many countries. The tip is not only included in the bill, but tips are shared among servers. That meant that if I needed to order something or pay my bill, I didn't need to wait for my server. Any server in the restaurant could help me. Tax is also included in prices too, so what you see is what you pay. Story 9. How poorly Americans dress. Massively oversized or sometimes undersized shirts, pants, graphic tees, sports jerseys, sweatpants, and hoodies everywhere. Coming back home from Scandinavia was eye-opening. I now buy clothes that actually fit and make an effort to not look like I rolled out of bed. Story 10. The lack of respect when it comes to noise. Even just on a train here, someone will be talking on their phone so everyone else can hear, or in a shop, someone will be having a conversation on the phone instead of just minding others' personal peace. Story 11. Convenience in the U.S. is pretty great. In Europe, stores and restaurants close early. A lot of pharmacies have weird hours, like only being open Monday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It makes things really inconvenient if you need something. In the U.S., you can order food at 3 a.m. if you want. Grocery stores are open until 10 p.m. daily. Pharmacies and gas stations are open 24/7. Story 12 lived in Norway, Spain, Finland, and Sweden for extended periods of time. Biggest difference is everyone in the U.S. is fat as, especially the Midwest where I'm from. Out west is a little better. Currently live in Utah. I think a lot of it comes down to car-centric cities as opposed to walking, massive portion sizes, and Thai-quality food. Story 13. I left the U.S. 14 years ago to live in France and return once a year to see family. It always takes me a few days to adjust to the signature, casual, friendly nature of Americans in public places. Also, I always forget that I can do errands like grocery shopping on Sunday while I'm in the U.S. However, the biggest culture shock for me is how loud it is everywhere. People speak loudly, music is loud in restaurants and cafes, playgrounds are very, very loud. Inside voices in the U.S. are outside voices in a lot of the world. It's not a judgment statement. I was used to it for a lot of my life, but I'm not used to it anymore. Story 14. Coming back to the U.S. after living in Germany, I was blown away by how big everything felt. Cars, roads, even grocery stores. Also missed the efficient public transport. Suddenly needing a car for everything was a bummer. The portion sizes here are still wild to me. Story 15, how fat people are too. How profit-centric rather than patient-centric the healthcare system is. 3. How with no credit score, you can't do much. Even though I had credit cards with a total limit of $100K overseas, they don't care. 4. How big the cars, SUVs, and parking spaces are. 5. How friendly people tend to be on the surface, but dig a little deeper and they don't really care about you or your fate. Friendships are elusive. Story 16. Random people speaking to me everywhere. People saying good morning as I walk past them on the sidewalk. Grocery store cashiers wishing me a good afternoon. Strangers who work in my office building smiling or saying hello in the elevator. I felt like they were either trying to pickpocket me or maybe I had gum in my hair or something. Nope, just Americans. Story 17. After returning from living in India, I woke up parched one morning and realized that I didn't have any bottled water in the house. I got all distressed because it was early and stores weren't open and it was cold and dark. Imagine my joy when I remembered I had potable water flowing into my house. Story 18. Moving from Europe to the southwest, everybody was so much louder. Enormous American flags everywhere. Mega churches everywhere. McMansions. So many huge vehicles. More fat people. So many places being open late or 24/7. Driving 8 hours and being in Texas the whole time when 8 hours in Europe would have meant crossing so many countries. Story 19. Lived in Seoul for 3 years and moved back in 2011. Culture shock was lack of fresh and convenient food. In Seoul, I could grab some rice rolls, kimchi soup, steamed sausage, or a rice bowl mixed with fresh veggies at any street cafe for like the equivalent of $4 USD. Fresh bakeries everywhere, and most meat-based stews would have entire cuts with the bone, tendon, etc. I could see nature in all my food. In the US, all fast and convenient food was meat, cheese, and either fried or microwaved. Story 20. The disappointing lack of public transportation. I was abroad in Chile for a summer a while back, and they have an excellent metro system and bus service. Once I got home, I realized how much I missed being able to get around so easily, without worrying about gas, traffic, etc. Story 21. Coming from Japan, the level of rudeness from people working in service and just people working at the airport in general was the biggest thing at first. The extreme levels of obesity in some people also caught me off guard. Like, you can of course find overweight people over there, but almost never the type that is so big they have to ride on scooters to move around or can fit into a single seat. Story 22. The difference in how the food affected my whole body in a positive way after being away from the US for almost 2 years. My wife and I both had physical withdrawals when we arrived in South America from the difference in the food for at least the first 2 weeks. Couldn't figure it out at first until our bodies adjusted. Both immediately lost weight without trying, and our whole physical appearance changed for the entire duration in a very positive way. Never felt so good in my life. After a few months back in the US, it all came back no matter how good we tried to eat. It was very eye-opening to say the least. Edit typo. Story 23. Coming back from Italy, the biggest shock was definitely the portion sizes and just how much more friendly people are in casual interactions. Also, driving everywhere felt so strange after being used to walking or taking public transport. It took a while to adjust back. Story 24. I lived in Central America for 22 years, and returning to the US to live, the healthcare system just hit me in the face. What a show! On the plus side, I like that there are so many delivery options from stores from Amazon to the local Kroger grocery deliveries. Not talking about getting a McDonald's burger delivered, though, from Uber Eats or something. That's not for me. The numbers of huge new cars on the road was shocking. It was pleasant, though, to find so many sidewalks. Advertising. Everywhere. Mail, phone calls, it goes on and on. When I lived in Central America, I had a P.O. box. There was no home delivery, and I would get maybe one piece of mail a month in that box. These days, I never answer my phone if I don't know the number. Prices of some things. 3 russet potatoes, $5, WTF. Story 25. Been living in Germany for the last year and change. Americans drive everywhere. Even in the land of Das Auto, tons of people walk, bike, and take transit. I literally have not driven a car once since I've been out here. Meanwhile, when I come back and visit the States, the first thing I do is go to my dad's house and grab my car because it's literally impossible to get around without one. Story 26. It took me a long time to get used to grocery shopping again and the sheer number of choices available. It was option paralysis every time. An entire aisle of cereals, the juice aisle, the milk aisle, so many varieties of everything. In Africa, you were lucky if they had milk at all at the store, and you certainly wouldn't have to choose between whole, 2%, almond, or oat. To this day, I prefer small stores with fewer options or I get overwhelmed. Story 27. After living in Korea and Japan, I will always forever appreciate the independence/individualism of American culture. Especially in Korea, it felt like I joined gang cult when I realized even the simplest of tasks required the consensus of the entire office. I saw a 46YO feel like he didn't have enough authority to paper in the printer, so we had to wait and ask the office superior hours later. It's hard to describe in a small post. I just feel like there's a certain kind of autonomy that exists here that doesn't exist over there, with regards to work. Story 28. Just how incredibly fake everyone in the US seems to be. Nobody engages in real conversation. Nobody really seems to care about anyone else. Nobody spontaneously does dinner just because it is fun. It was excruciating to go back to the US after being outside of the country for 25 years. I felt like I was surrounded by aliens. Story 29. I've lived in Europe, Asia, Africa, and now live in Hawaii, which feels very much not like the US mainland. Reverse culture shock is almost always about how talkative Americans are and how loud. And food variety, you can get almost anything anywhere. Also, people wearing shoes inside all of the time. It's so gross and dirty, why don't people take off their shoes? Story 30. US born and raised, went to Mexico for 4 years, moved to Canada. When we came here, it was really hard for me to drink tap water again. I actually couldn't get past the taste once I had been used to the big 3-gallon refillable water and use that, but my kids absolutely didn't believe me that they could drink it and be fine. We also were excited to have a regular shower with water hot already. Many people don't have a hot water heater and use a metal element that goes in a bucket, and you wash off with that. I've been in Canada for going on 3 YRs now, and I still think about it when I step in the shower here. Story 31. Moved to Italy for a year for work. I went grocery shopping at Costco my second day back in the US, and to be blunt, I was shocked at how pale, fat, sickly, and miserable everyone looked. There are plenty of things that I didn't like about living in Italy, but the people there were generally healthy-looking and vibrant. And the weekly visit to the market was a fun, social, and energetic experience. The contrast between that and shuffling my way through a giant fluorescent-lit warehouse full of unhappy people dragging themselves through what appeared to be a miserable chore was very stark. Story 32. The culture of the country I had been living in was not as the most important. I will cut the line, it's my turn first. I'll yell at people to get my way. I'll vocalize my feelings loudly, as Americans tend to be. So as soon as I arrived in the U.S. passport holder line at JFK Airport, that aspect of American culture was loud and clear. Aside from that, the lack of casual alcoholism made me feel bad about myself. Story 33. I lived in Japan, Taiwan, and China the past 10 years and came back to the States for the job and helped my wife with the immigration stuff. So for me, it was the overweight people. It seems there are many more people here that are obese than there were even 10 years ago. Restaurant food choices are boring. Bars here are kinda meh. The food and bar culture back in Taiwan and Japan are leagues above what we have found here in the States so far. We've been here for almost 2 years and are already actively looking for ways back to get visas in either Japan or Europe. And we've decided we don't want to raise our kid in a car-centric country and where you never see people and kids outside just playing and being outside. Story 34. Steroids must be more easily available. Also, everyone seems unhappy, aggressive, and performative. Terrible vibes when back in July. Don't expect to return for a long time. OMD guards with guns everywhere. Homeless are a huge thing and there are not enough green spaces and everything costs money. Not enough free places like parks. Story 35. Return to the U.S. from Korea. It gets talked about all the time, but just how unnecessarily complicated and inconvenient our healthcare system is. To go from a system where you can go see a doctor's specialist any day of the week without an appointment, to know you will be covered, and to have the peace of mind that you'll spend probably less than $20, to then go to whatever we have here, it's just absurd to me. I also pay twice for my healthcare here than I did in Korea. We are so duped for a system that is openly robbing us and not keeping us well. Story 36. After living in China and coming back to Houston, it was the size of the people. Was still in the airport and really needed to pee. The hallway to the toilet was blocked by 2 women casually strolling side by side, and I remember thinking, this would have taken at least 5 women in China to cover the same amount of space. Story 37. Didn't live in Europe, but I've been for long durations of time. How much Americans seem to fear others was really jarring to me, and I'm shocked this wasn't in the top comments. All the Finns and Icelanders I know seem to live their lives hardly worrying about anyone or anything going wrong, whereas Americans and Canadians are obsessed with crime and problems that are very unlikely to happen to them. It's a very trust no one. They could be criminals mindset that exists here. Story 38. Biggest shock for me is there is no third place in America to just hang out. My parents live in a very typical cookie-cutter American suburb, and it's very hard to find a place to walk to or travel to without a car. It feels so isolating. Some American cities feel really dirty. The graffiti, the litter, and the smell of human piss. Also, I feel overwhelmed when I go to Walmart sometimes. I try to find something in the store, and I feel like I have too many options. Story 39, some from moving from Germany back to the US. Going from super fast cashiers at supermarkets and trying to keep up to super slow cashiers, that have to stand, and the store bagging for me. Keeping right on Die Autobahn and only go left to pass, and being annoyed to slow to 120 kmp, approximately 75 mph, going through cities to people passing on the right and having to set my cruise control so I don't do 80 plus. Things being more clean in Germany than the US. Pedestrian-friendly areas in cities, sidewalk cafes, and taking time to eat, drink out to cars everywhere. Can't really walk anywhere and being rushed when eating out. After spending summers in Greece with family to going back, and this was a really small town 20 plus years ago, can hop on a flying dolphin, hydrofoil, to go neighboring islands towns super cheap and fast. Ferry boat service doesn't really exist where I live, despite a large body of water. Nothing is open in the afternoon. It is sort of very hot to everything open. Taking time to relax and enjoy life. Swim every day, my aunt says after every meal. Going for walks, relaxing in the shade all afternoon to everything is rushed. Again, this was a small village. Evening stroll. Everyone goes out in the early evening, 7 p.m., and just strolls up and down the waterfront. You talk to people and just enjoy life. Where I live, you'd find few people doing this. It helps that in the village there are restaurants, bars, and cafes along the waterfront too, and where I live it is all park space or industrial. Eating 2 meals. A light mid-morning breakfast lunch and then a huge dinner around 10 p.m. The dinner lasts hours. Here are 3 meals with an early dinner. Story 40. Everyone is so miserable. Strangers crying in their cars in traffic. People on the verge of violent outbursts at the grocery store. Adults seemingly ready to commit homicide over children's sports games. Granted, I spend most of my time in Northern Europe these days. The emotional range is extremely limited here. However, people tend to be happy here. Even those that are not happy aren't on the verge of breakdown at the slightest inconvenience. Story 41. People having speakerphone or FaceTime conversations in public without headphones, or playing music loudly from their phones or cars. There's no regard for anyone else existing in public space. The healthcare system is a total scam. Everyone's trying to grab money from you at every turn. Public transport options are embarrassing, but it's nice how people randomly compliment you in public. Story 42. Having to drive absolutely everywhere. Traffic is universally accepted, and no real effort is being made to change that other than widening roads that only promote more traffic. Cities should be walkable. The entire country of Japan is walkable. Tokyo is a dream when it comes to having a proper metro to take you places. Meanwhile, the only local train in my area closes down at 9:30 and doesn't operate on the weekends. I can't even go downtown to enjoy a basketball game without having to drive and pay for parking. Even though the train station is walking distance from the arena, I'd love to be able to go downtown and having a fun night out and not have to worry about driving home. Story 43. One of the big things for me was adjusting to American friendliness, as in, it's hard to tell the difference between who's an acquaintance and who's actually my friend. I spent several years in Europe, and that line is pretty clear, and I always appreciated that boundary. When I moved back to the States, people thought I was being cold when I was just treating them normally, I thought. Story 44. Mexico for 12 years. What always struck me when coming north was the effort required to find a decent restaurant. The U.S. is all chains all the time now, and if it isn't a chain, it's kind of a roll of the dice. My town in Mexico had 140 restaurants walking distance, and literally none were a chain. We had a McDonald's but had to get in a car and drive to that. Same for Burger King. There was a Starbucks. So if you count that as a restaurant, then remove the word literally. But otherwise, it was a wide variety of individually owned places. Also, the roads in the U.S. are a million times better. Every time I come north, I find myself speeding because any given road would be 20 miles per hour faster in Mexico for a given quality. Story 45. I spent 15 years on overseas assignments in Australia, Japan, China, Singapore, and last stint in Bangkok, 2003 to 2018. Came back for quarterly business reviews and visiting family. The biggest thing for me was noticing how much of a show news on TV became when I got back to the U.S. on both sides of the fence. I had to stop watching the news altogether to maintain sanity. Asian airline service is so much better than U.S.-based airline service. Basically, Asian airline, how can I help you? U.S.-based airline, sit down, shut up. but nachos are better in the US. Singapore had a special different way of messing them up for each different so-called Mexican restaurant. The one exception was Cafe Iguana in the Riverside area of Singapore. They got it close except for the lettuce they would put on top of the nachos. Overall, the version of Mexican food available in the US is much better in the US than pretty much anywhere in the world, except for Mexico. Their Mexican food is fantastic. Drink refills at restaurants. Tipping in the US, I got back to the US about 18 months before COVID. During COVID, and now my feeling is tipping has gotten way out of hand in the US. Now I have to tip every friggin' body I see. No way, not doing it. I've been tipping 20% in the US since before I went overseas, tipping to traditional tipping positions. But now kids that make $16/hour in the sandwich shop in San Diego have that damn iPad with 20% being the lowest choice. No. The biggest difference? Healthcare. Every country above I lived, with work permits, paying taxes, etc., I did not have to worry one bit about healthcare. I did not worry that if something catastrophic happened that I would become destitute from medical bills. The cost and billing practices I encountered when I did need medical care were reasonable. Not so much in the US. In the US, if something goes wrong and I'm in the wrong place and by force have to deal with out-of-network, I'd be out of luck. The insurance I have now with an employer, that's not the case, but when I had to get insurance on my own via ACA, out-of-network emergency, pretty much on your own. Appreciation for what we do have in the US, I spent time in the countries listed above as my base of operations, but I traveled all over the region. Australia, New Zealand, China, Korea, Japan, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Pakistan. There are good and bad in each, but overall there is a reason why there is a net influx of people into the US than leaving. There are opportunities here that many people don't have in their home countries. After living overseas for 15 years, except for the healthcare situation, my favorite place on the planet is San Diego, California. Story 46. How much more complicated and cumbersome everything here is. A few examples. The listed prices aren't what you'd actually pay. There's typically sales tax plus sometimes tip. Everything involving the medical system is a cluster, and no one can tell you in advance what it'll cost. Customer service tries to prevent you from actually accomplishing what you're looking to do, like cancel a subscription or return an item. Also, people apologize here for things that are in no way their fault. For example, if a store is out of stock of something, an employee in the US would say sorry. Story 47. Everything is so covered in cars, so much space dedicated to parking. In the time it takes to walk from one end of the Walmart parking lot to the other, you could have passed through a vibrant, winding cobblestone city center with dozens or hundreds of shops, restaurants, and things to do. Instead, we need space for everybody that could possibly fit in the store to put their 2-ton boxes of metal, plastic, and rubber so they can buy a few bananas, a TV, and a vibrating dildo in the same soulless store. Story 48. Having a gatekeeper, physic, and doctor dictate when and what specialist doctors you can see. In South Korea, everyone is covered by the same national health insurance plan. You can visit any doctor at any time. With the exception of a few specialists at major university hospitals, you would need a referral for that. Say I was having ear pain. I could visit any ENT clinic in the country. And if I didn't care for their treatment, I could go visit another. This whole system of having to get approval from your primary care physician first and the sheer wait times to get an appointment, the whole U.S. healthcare is a horrific nightmare. Though certain treatments, surgeries, specialists, technologies may only be available in the U.S., but you'll never be able to afford most of it. Story 49. Fast food. Hitting one of those high-traffic suburban streets with McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, Dunkin's, Popeyes, Captain D's, KFC, Pizza Hut, Little Caesars, etc., etc., and dozens of gas stations cutting prices against each other to the horizon. I was in heaven. Story 50. I have a friend that moved to Germany after he graduated and has lived there the last 15 years. He visits every other year, and I occasionally visit him on opposite years. He loves coming back for his 2-week trips, but we both agree that living here isn't something he will be able to do. Not with the laws and way our work culture is compared to that of the EU. Story 51. Obesity. Lack of awareness of the outside world by most Americans. I was stationed in Germany for 2 years. I loved it and traveled all over Europe. There's so much variety in food, cultures, lifestyles, architecture, etc. It was depressing coming back to the US and seeing the same chain restaurants everywhere, same stucco box homes, fat, loud, soda-fueled people, and having to readjust to the fake food supply. Life in the US is more convenient, though. Story 52. 2 things, television and grocery stores. I've never been a TV watcher, but you best bet I spent about a week flipping through and admiring it all. After living in a country where you aren't fluent in the language, there weren't many TV options before. Grocery stores are just so overwhelming, stimulation everywhere, And I'm not someone with ADHD or anything, but after the quiet small stores I was used to overseas, big stores were a spectacle in themselves. Story 53. Grew up overseas in a second world country that struggles with third world problems still. I was shocked by how Americans think that their first world problems are the end all be all. And it was also shocking to see how sensitive some Americans are. It was weird because it felt super tone deaf seeing how they think their problems are such a big deal. But then, on a global scale, their problems are stupid and irrelevant. Story 54. Reliance on cars for everything. I lived in Tokyo for 2 years and I probably sat in a car 3 times total, not counting taxis. During that time, I never had to buy gas. I never had to find a parking spot. I never had to deal with other drivers. I didn't need insurance. Instead, I got to go anywhere in an efficient, clean, and reliable way. Story 55. I returned to the SF Bay Area after spending a week in Japan. Going back to BART after enjoying the Japanese train network was super depressing. My wife and I got around everywhere we wanted to in Tokyo and Kyoto without needing a bus or taxi. Trains got us everywhere. Story 56. Legit mentally ill folks that should be in an institution, just walking around. Lived in Korea for 13 months before coming back to the US. Busted it through customs to grab a smoky treat before getting back on another flight. The almost instant fear of crazies outside of SeaTac Airport. I remember seeing this guy that was going around checking everybody's shoes. You just don't see that abroad. And Korea, forget it. They whisk away anybody who doesn't color within the lines at birth. Very fascist, but it works, sorry. Story 57. Lived in the UK for a year and a half. The first thing I did upon my return was drive from Dallas to Phoenix, 15 hours in a car with a dog. From London, that'd take me either way past the northern tip of Scotland or a good deal into continental Europe. In the States, that's like 2 states over. The sheer vast distances in the US are mind-blowing in comparison. Story 58. My suburban landscape looked so wide and flat, like squashed, as if it was an optical illusion. The ranch-style houses all looked like they'd sunk into the ground a few feet. I constantly felt like I needed to shake my head to get rid of the illusion. People at home are really fun and nice. Landing in Detroit and having the baggage handlers having the most banal banter with travelers. Hey, how y'all doing? Have a nice night. All big smiles, joking. It made my heart sing and literally brought tears to my eyes because I realized this is what makes home feel like home. French people are wonderful, but just aren't like that. Studied at university in a mid-sized city in France. Story 59. I spent a while in South Korea, and the first thing I noticed when returning was how much space Americans tend to take up. I don't mean our mass, which is substantial comparatively, but how we carry ourselves. In Korea, everyone seems to work together to lessen the burden of their presence, where in America, the individual is king. I am walking, others must move. Story 60. The hostility and rudeness of returning is always jarring. If you get a U.S. airline on the way back, the flight attendants do their best to remind you of what to expect back in the U.S. of A. But if you get foreign flight crew, sometimes when I came back late at night, it wouldn't be till I went out to work or grocery that I would realize I was back and to put on my shell of indifference. Story 61. After living in Japan for a while, I had to get used to driving again. Actually, the first time I drove was late at night to get a snack at a convenience store. And when I was stopped at a light, I realized I was in the left lane and had been driving on the left side. That never happened again. From both my experiences living in Germany and Japan, I missed the convenience of being able to walk to shops and restaurants near my neighborhood. I know there are places in the U.S. you can do that, but not in the burbs where I live. Story 62. I lived abroad in Seoul. I learned a little bit of the language, but since I was in such a big city, most people spoke English. The biggest change I dealt with when I returned was being able to understand what everyone was saying all the time. When I was out to eat or in the grocery store or anywhere really, I mostly tuned out conversations because my Korean was so poor. When I returned to the United States, I could understand every inane thing people were saying, and it was exhausting. Story 63. I grew up in the U.S. but have spent my whole adult life in the U.K. and Austria. There are so many unique or nearly unique things about the U.S. Everything in the U.S. is huge. I'm in the U.S. this week and just visited a friend in Chicago. She was apologizing for a cramped flat, but it was palatial by middle-class Western Euro standards. Only thing we've got on Americans in that department is super high ceilings. It applies to food too, of course. I just saw a pack of Reese's Cups at Target that was more than a meter high. Diabolical. Lots of stuff is super sweet when it shouldn't be. Coffee, bread, sauces. It's kind of icky once you start noticing it. Especially in Austria, shops and offices have very limited hours by comparison. I forget this sometimes and find myself planning around not being able to get anything on Sundays or after about 19:00. Tip culture as it is in the States wouldn't be tolerated in Austria. The UK is slightly closer to the American model, but not much. They're quite forward in asking for it. It should, of course, be given, but it ought to be presented like a choice. IMO. No gun signs on business doors. That's a stark reminder when you've been away. This probably runs counter to the common narrative, but I find lots of Americans are quite rude in that they're not really aware of other people around them. Flying in this week, I was shocked by the fact that people just splay their stuff out on an escalator and block the path. You're supposed to stand on the right side and leave the left lane open for people in a hurry. There's also stuff like playing music out loud on buses and trains. This happens everywhere, but seems more common in the US. The amount of space given over to cars. There are so many parking garages, it's a ridiculous waste of space, and they're invariably ugly as sin. We have them in Europe, but not as many, and at least in the big cities, they're generally subterranean. Story 64. Lived in Ireland and traveled in London for a good chunk of this year, and coming home, I missed the public transportation so much. I was living in Limerick, and the main train station there is really a hub for traveling to most places in Ireland, and taking the tube in London was so easy and fast. Having to come home and sit in Los Angeles traffic has made me bitter, to say the least. Story 65. It took me years after moving back from England to stop being hypervigilant about which side of the road I was checking when doing anything near a road. The first several days of looking the wrong way and nearly having an issue did that. And still, years and years later, I can be driving down the road, and if there are no other cars and no signage facing me, I suddenly think, wait, what side am I supposed to be on? It still hits me. Story 66. Have not lived abroad, but my family and I went to Thailand for 2 weeks. Everyone is so happy, it's unreal how positive and joyful most people seem. No matter where we went, from touristy areas out to a backstreet side road tea spot, everyone was just smiles, friendly, eager to help and say hello. The day I came back to New York, I was completely blown away by how miserable everyone is. I live on Long Island, and it was shocking for days after I came back, just how unhappy our society is here. Story 67. How difficult it is to get a good cup of coffee, especially good espresso. I live outside of NYC, and I've yet to find coffee like there is in Lisbon, with that delightful, let's take a break and get a cup culture. The rush, the press, the hurry, the idea that if I'm not getting something done, I'm without value, the constant monetization of everything, the idea that money is more important than anything else. Some of these are personal to my own family, but still, the idea that if I'm not optimizing, I'm wasting. Personal space requirements. We tend to stand far apart. Our elevators are large, and the first floor is the first one up, of course. Story 68. The way people drive. Right after my brother and I came back from Iran with stops in India and Thailand, we were driving from Long Beach to Redondo Beach on the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, and without thinking about it, my brother white-lined his way past 2 slower-moving vehicles. Only we were in a car. Of course, the drivers on either side completely freaked out. My brother and I were both like, what's their problem? Then I shouted, holy bro, we're in the United States, and his eyes got big as dinner plates. He drove in the right lane for the rest of the drive. LOL. Story 69. I lived in Japan from 2016 to 2022 without ever coming back to the US. Biggest reverse culture shock was how extroverted people tend to be in the US, both positively and negatively. In Japan, people pretty much stick to themselves for the most part, unless they're drinking. Also masks. During COVID, everyone wore masks in Japan. Some Japanese people already wore masks pre-COVID for allergies and whatnot, and I became used to it. I got back to the US, and it was this huge political statement to wear or not wear a mask. It was incredibly stupid. Story 70. Cars. They are enormous and everywhere. My parents are getting on in years, and I'd rather they didn't drive to the airport to pick me up. So every time I visit, I basically have no choice but to rent a car. I just booked one for my next trip, and an SUV is by far the cheapest option. I had to pay extra because I want an economy car. Story 71. Oh, this is a good one for me. I did a 14-month backpacking trip in South Central America. Most of my time was spent in eco-lodges, hostels, and far away from big cities. Unknown to me, I got dengue fever on my couple days. Had no idea until after I returned home when symptoms started hitting. I remember the day after getting back, I went to the grocery store and damn near had a panic attack. I don't know how to explain it other than the sheer amount of stuff. It was overwhelming, and my dengue symptoms compounded the feeling of fatigue and confusion. Super strange experience. Story 72. Suburbs. Don't take your picket fence and yard for granted. I guess by extension I should say we live very spaciously. Sidewalks are bigger, street lanes are luxuriously wide, our stores are huge and not cramped. Honestly, I've had a good old American road trip on my bucket list for a while. I should take advantage of this gigantic country and its robust road system. Low prices. Results may vary depending on country. Bad public transportation. Bad service at the low-class variety. McDonald's in other countries seem luxurious by comparison. General work dissatisfaction, but we also put a heavier shoulder into our work. This actually surprised me. I was raised to believe we were lazy incompetents. We are busy beavers on coke. Our racism/nationalism/jingoism often felt tame sometimes when compared to some other countries. Bottomless coffee. Not amazing coffee, but hey, I just need something with caffeine. Keep it coming until I'm ready to step into the salt mine. Our public schools are very unregimented. We take for granted being able to wear our jeans and Hot Topic t-shirts or dress up as goth clowns. Story 73 went to visit fam back in the US recently and had a layover at JFK. It took me a few minutes to figure out why everything sounded wrong/different. I'm so used to hearing a butt-ton of accents from different countries that even the diverse accents of the US sounded monotone AF. Story 74. Leaving Sicily and coming to DC, what surprised me is how people are obsessed with inanimate objects like their own cars. Sure, people in Italy love their cars when they can afford nice ones, but they still see them as objects. Americans see their possessions as their babies. So weird to me. Story 75. Some people never open their windows. Their house stinks of them, their cooking, their animals, but especially them. And they're nose kind, so they don't know how strong their home aroma is anymore. When we come back from vacation and the house has been sitting closed for a couple of weeks, it just smells like books because we have a big bookcase and because we air out the house every day. Story 76. I, my wife, and my daughters finally have everything at arm's reach. There are playgrounds everywhere, things for them to do, after-school activities, amusement parks, big stores that have anything you need open almost all the time, and opportunities around every corner. People are nice, smile at you on the street, and interact with you frequently. Houses are bigger for less and have lots of space around them. I spent 10 years outside of the States in a variety of different countries across the world and came back a few months ago and can absolutely say that being back in the U.S. has been almost entirely positive in every possible way. Story 77. Lack of public transport. Me and my wife spent 2 weeks in Portugal and Spain. Trains between cities, metro in the cities, buses to more remote areas, etc. All for a few bucks a ride at max. We get to our home airport in Jackson, Y, which is about 8 miles north of the town itself, and have to wait 2 hours for a shuttle to take us from the airport to town. You can see town from the airport, and it was $10 a person to do it. And they have since canceled that shuttle, meaning your only option is a $50 Uber ride. Story 78. When I leave just for a couple weeks at a time, especially when I go to LATAM, it takes a week or two for my stomach to adjust to the awful food filled with additives and trans fats. I get diarrhea when I come back. I eat home cooking down there and it's all fresh ingredients, and McDonald's or even Chick-fil-A will really up my stomach. I mostly eat home cooking here. We cook with fresh ingredients at home, but the processed foods and fast food is just so obviously unhealthy. It's something you don't notice until you go extended periods without it. Story 79. Not me, but a friend of mine taught in China for a while. She said where she taught, when she would walk outside in warmer months, she would get a feeling of dirt on her arms at the end of the day. She said it was due to the amount of the pollution in the city that she was teaching. This was a few years ago. I don't know if it's still this bad. She also was traumatized by the eating of dogs and skin dogs hanging in meat markets. We're both big dog lovers. Story 80. I'm just visiting here for the month. But the fact that smiling and saying hello/making small talk to strangers is viewed as the polite thing to do. I almost apologized to the stranger standing in front of me when my dad started making small talk with him before I realized that I was being rude for not engaging. Story 81. The sequencing of exit names on exit signs for roadways. In Europe, the bottom listed exit name is the first one you'll encounter, and in the US, the top one is the first one you'll encounter. I still have to decipher this with every exit sign that has street names listed, and I left Europe over 30 years ago. Story 82. We moved to country, USA, and have loved that 95% of stores are closed. My kids and husband missed so many holidays and meals together because everyone had crazy retail schedules. They didn't get to pick a day off, so we did what we could. It's irritating for people not doing retail, but I'm glad to see some have one day for sure a family can spend together without having to work. My kids got stuck working Thanksgiving when stores decided they wanted more money and shoppers thought it was a great idea. I was so thankful then they moved away from retail positions. It's hell on a family. Story 83. Jokes on you. I never went back. Joking aside, I have lived in Korea for many years. When returning to the US to visit my family, I can't help but notice the differences in restaurant experiences. Not only are restaurant prices ridiculously high, the service seems to have really dropped off. I've also noticed that there seems to be a general acceptance of obesity in the US, that people are unwilling to make lifestyle changes to prevent health issues.